Hello, and welcome to this webinar by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, where we'll be talking about illegal waste trade. And we'll focus on the ways to tackle this ever-growing issue, including through new policy instruments. My name is Virginia Comolli. I'm the head of the Pacific Program at the Global Initiative, and I will be your moderator today. So before we turn to the discussion, just a couple of practical points. The event is scheduled to last for up to 90 minutes in total. And following the presentation, we'll have time for questions and comments from the audience. So please use the Q&A function here on Zoom to submit your comments throughout the discussion. No need to wait until the end of the presentation. And then we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions and comments later on. So this event is being live streamed and also recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch it on the Global Initiative YouTube channel shortly. So now turning to the topic at hand. So as a society, and particularly in Western countries, we produce an enormous amount of waste, which local authorities are not able to process and recycle domestically. As a result, there is a well-established trend in exporting waste produced in the likes of Europe, North America, or Australia to emerging and developing countries. These transshipments of waste are regulated by a number of international conventions, as well as regional and domestic legislation. However, unscrupulous businesses, as well as criminal actors, have found ways to evade these regulations, to ship hazardous, harmful waste to countries which are not in fact able to process it, giving rise to a multitude of environmental and health harms. So given the ever-expanding production of waste and the challenges in enforcing existing legislation, some new instruments are being designed and negotiated, such as the UN Plastics Treaty. To help us unpack some of these key issues, we have a very strong lineup of speakers today who will be able to provide their reflections on how to tackle waste trafficking from the perspective of producer countries, receiving countries, as well as at the international community level. So before I turn to them, I would like to invite Charlene Sheen to set the scene for us. Charlene is the Managing Director of Green Transparency. She's an international legal expert working on matters related to environmental crime, international criminal law, illicit trade, anti-corruption, organized crime, and economic crimes. She is also the author of a recent paper produced for the Global Initiative on measuring the scope and scale of waste management crimes. So Charlene, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone out there. My name is Charlene Chin, and indeed, I'm the author of this one of these latest reports. And I'm going to share my screen just to give you a sense of what the report is all about. Just give me a few moments where I put it on full screen. There we go. So this report that just came out, it's a lengthy title, but we thought that it was prudent also to follow it up with a webinar, which I have decided to sort of play with the words a little bit. What are we wasting our time on? This whole issue about illegal waste trade. So thank you for joining us today. So this is the cover of the report that was written, and it is quite a lengthy title, and a little bit of a background here. So Global Initiative reached out to me to look into the problem of waste crime, or let's say illegal waste in trade. And it was meant for the purposes of the Global Organized Crime Index, which I can say was launched last month in September. It's the second iteration after the first edition in 2021. The whole purpose of looking into this waste crime in this whole research is because Global Initiative had an interest in waste crime as a criminal market. In the process of doing my research, I realized that it wasn't going to be very easy to fit it into sort of the categorizations of the global index itself. And this presentation will be about why this is so. So as you can see on the right, this is just a screenshot of what the global index looks like. It's an amazing tool, an interactive one as well, where you can see the global map itself. You can see, in various degrees, the impacts of different criminal markets. Unfortunately, waste crime wasn't included in the global index this time around, but I'm pretty sure and I'm confident also that once global initiative develops this index a little bit further on down the line, that we will be able to include more specific crimes, including waste crime in the future. Now, what did I find in the report? In my research, I found myself hitting a lot of walls. So I would say that it's a little bit of a conundrum. The FATF, or the Financial Action Task Force, they summarized this problem that I had quite succinctly. And it says here that, differences in national definitions of environmental crime complicate the quantification of crime types and data collection. And I'm pretty sure that some of my fellow speakers will speak about this, that data collection is key, but also can be quite difficult in the waste sector. Now, some of the things that propped up was that, the definition of waste itself in different countries is a problem. So in very general terms, the types of waste that we find ourselves dealing with or we find ourselves knowing about are municipal wastes, industrial wastes, agricultural waste, and also hazardous waste. And these types of waste are regulated very differently as well. And then the second factor of waste management is, of course, the operative activity that comes with the waste itself. So from start to finish, and this is just really a generalization of the activities that I involve, it's the collection of waste, it's the handling of waste, it's the storage of waste, it's treatment and disposal. They are all subjected to different policies, different regulations as well. Now, what of course was interesting, and this is also the purpose of this webinar, is that there is a clear convergence between legal and illegal activities, legal and illegal companies, and legal and illegal actors, of course. Now, another problem that waste crime itself, or the illegal waste trade itself, is this contradiction, right? Waste is a huge economic sector. If you want to admit it or not, it is huge, but it has a negative value. What does negative value mean? As opposed to positive value, where the product itself has already right at the beginning a value, waste has no value, because this is, the end of the line products, the end of the line stuff that we all use. So basically, it requires money to deal with waste. So again, huge economic sector. So there is profit to be made from dealing with something that in the first place would have high cost to manage, but also at the same time have negative value. Now, what I also found in the report, and what I also propose as, strategic pinpoints to strengthen, is, of course, we need to look at the definition. I'm by no means offering a solid definition of waste crime or waste management or illegal waste trade, or any definition for organized crime for that matter. But I think legislators and regulators need to look very, very carefully at how it is defined, and also in the first place acknowledge that, definition is definitely a problem. So here, the definition that I proposed in the paper is that the waste criminal market is defined by activities of exporters, importers, local waste operators, with the characterization of waste as the enabler. Why do I emphasize the characterization of waste? It is because some waste costs more value than other types of wastes. So one can imagine that, e-waste in certain countries would have a very high value because of, the materials that one can find in that for reuse and recycling in other parts of the world. Plastic waste, if the destination country is a recycling area, then that also has value to the recipient country. Now, what I also proposed in the report is a sort of a trade-related assessment. And here one needs to look at the role of developed versus developing country. The rationale behind this trade-related assessment is because if we were to look at the role of developed countries, they're usually the ones who are supplying that waste, whereas the developing countries are the ones receiving, right, the waste. And the recipient countries also is determined by their level of industrialization. What I find is that a lot of waste would end up in countries who have very big manufacturing capacity, very big industrial capacity. Does that mean that they have the capacity to treat the waste and dispose of this waste, or even sort through the waste? That's not necessarily true. What I also find is that, the awareness of different countries also differ quite a lot. So whereas in developed countries, there's already a lot of awareness on how to separate waste. In some other parts of the world, the awareness is still in development. So the awareness of, sorting through the garbage, the awareness of toxicity in certain products is still not there. Facilities that also are provided to handle and to dispose of this waste is also very different in different countries. So I already highlighted that there's also disparity in regulation. There's a difference in capacity to deal with the problem of waste itself. The trade-related assessment proposal here also looks at, the reason why I propose so is because there are defective legislations out there. As much as we have a lot of regulation on waste and trade of hazardous waste these days, it is defective in a sense that the international standards are not implemented perfectly, regionally or even nationally. Some legislations in the EU, for instance, incentivizes and subsidizes countries to handle their waste properly. But this actually opens the room to a lot of unscrupulous behaviors, so to speak, which then opens the room to a lot of, let's say, organized crime, criminal crime activities, criminal activities, and in some parts of the world also where waste management is only being handled or starting to be handled by certain companies. You would also see infiltration of gangs. You would also see monopolization of the problem itself. Of course, I think some of us would know that Italy is one of the poster child in the past for, mafia being in the waste industry. And what happened to that is that, it had a lot of health implications and environmental implications on the society itself. Now, the other point that I want to bring up in relation to a trade-related assessment proposal is that there is a trend of decentralization. So as much as it is a state responsibility, this divides into local authority as well. So municipalities, for instance, it is in their hands to deal with their cities, their towns' waste. So what happens is that there is a decentralization of power where the cities themselves are hiring private companies to help them collect the waste. So PPP or public-private partnerships are very much, at the same time, very much encouraged, but also they do form a very big part of the problem itself. So the conclusion I can say, at least from the report, is that one, we need to look at the actors a little bit closely. We need to look at who are the public actors or public implicated actors who are involved in this trade. So you can think of competent authorities, port authorities. You can also think of brokers in the private sector, the companies, the private companies who are dealing with this. So really take a look at the roles that these actors play, but also to get back to what I mentioned in that quote from FATF, is that data is really, really important. The report itself proposes that we start looking at it more from a very broad generalization of hazardous waste itself, because this is what we need to handle, right? The illegal trade of waste, we need to curb it. But how do we do that? We don't do that by sifting through the different types of waste and say, well, we found this much plastic, we found this much glass, we found this much e-waste. We need to look at it more as a general, is it hazardous? Is it hazardous waste? Is it arriving? Is it being exported? And lastly, of course, I really want to also emphasize, a lot of times in environmental crime, people are asking for regulation, more regulation. I would say that the trade in hazardous waste is already being regulated. We need to also consider whether or not more regulation is the answer here. So stringent regulation is not the answer. In developed countries where there are stringent regulations, you see that there are also loopholes that one can use. So to introduce or to copy and paste stringent regulations in developing countries will not necessarily work. There is also, in terms of data, and also for the sake of better amendment of regulation, let's put it that way, is that there is a need for both export and import countries to be at par with the types of data that they put out there and that they share. What I find from a lot of waste database is that the waste itself is generalized, and the collection of data of these types of waste, or the tonnage of waste that's being exported, they're not very they are not equal, they are not comparable. Also, the frequency of the collection of this data is not the same in different parts of the world. Whereas on the one hand, one requires data collection every year, another country says we'll collect the data every 2 years. So how do we come at an equal level of data? I think that there needs to be a lot of, let's say, collaboration. There's of course, webinars like this where we share information and share what the problem is, and also come up with potential solutions, I think would be very key. If there are any questions, of course, like Virginia says, put it in the Q&A box. I'm happy to answer those questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. That was very helpful in setting the scene and also highlighting some of the challenges that we face in terms of actually understanding the issue, and especially your discussion around the definition, but also around policies. And actually, it's not just about creating new policies and trying to implement them, because there have been actors that have been very skillful in identifying loopholes. So we need to think in a very smart way around these issues. So thank you very much for that. That sets us on a good, put us in a good position to progress into our discussion. And we will now turn into looking at this issue from the perspective of producer countries. And to do that, I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Huip van Wasten from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands, where he's a inspector focusing on the prevention and enforcement of illegal transboundary movements of hazardous waste. So hi, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing your perspective from the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for inviting our organization to give a presentation, and I'm the lucky one to do that. Thank you very much for being able to do this and to share the perspective also from, let's say, exporting or producing countries, as it was mentioned. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Well, it's loading, the presentation, I believe it's loading. We cannot see the slides just yet.
Still not? Because...
No. We can see that you've started sharing your screen, but we only see a black screen for now.
Yeah. Maybe you can try to stop it and redo it again.
Yeah, I will do that.
All good?
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, once again, thank you very much for inviting us to give the perspective of let's say, an EU exporting country or producing country of waste. Thank you very much, Charlene, for the introduction. A lot of topics will be covered, I think, in my presentation, at least from our perspective. So, yeah, this is what actually one of the things what we many people are thinking. In Europe, we think we recycle a lot, and actually the recycling is mainly, well, partly, not mainly, but a huge part of it is just collecting, sorting, baling up, putting in a container and sending it somewhere else in the world. And then you can imagine that that some people in the destination countries have a different perspective of what is coming out of those containers, and that they might think, and therefore I like this picture, that you are not going to be the dump site of European waste, which I fully understand. Let's start from the beginning and also the perspective we are talking. I heard Charlene already saying there's no need to change or strengthen the legislation because there is already proper legislation, and I cannot more agree with that. At least in the European Union, the legislation is there. It's very strict, but it's more about interpretation and how you should deal with this. Yeah, these laws and these regulations. So in the European Union, we are lucky we have one law, so to say, in all the EU member states, which is actually implementing the Basel Convention. So it's about transboundary movements of waste, and that's the EU Waste Shipment Regulation. There's no difference if this is in the Netherlands, in Romania, Hungary, Sweden, well, or Italy. We are all dealing with the same regulation. What does this regulation say, or does actually? It sets different procedures for waste shipments, which are shipped for disposal or for recycling. There are different procedures for hazardous and non-hazardous waste. And on top of that, there is extra, in addition, you can say extra regulations or laws on the export of non-hazardous waste to, let's say, developing countries, the so-called non-OECD countries. What are those procedures? In general, we can say you have notification and consent, which is based on the prior informed consent procedure of the Basel Convention, which is implemented in the EU through this waste shipment regulation. And that means that you need, let's say, a permit for shipments of hazardous waste and shipments of waste which are sent for disposal. And we have a kind of simplified procedure. And that's mainly when we are talking about shipments of non-hazardous waste destined for recycling. So the law is clear, the legislation is clear. This is where you have to look at. As I mentioned, in addition, there are specific procedures for export to non-OECD countries, and that's mainly for non-hazardous waste, because we have implemented the Basel ban amendment, and it was already done decades ago in the European Union. I think since 1998, it's prohibited to export hazardous waste from the European Union to non-OECD countries. So on top of that, in this export ban, it's related as well to the Basel Convention. So you see the codes for domestic municipal waste I-46, for the plastics and I-48, and there will be a change in the 1st of January 2025, when also all kind of electronic waste will be banned to be exported from the EU to non-OECD countries. For non-hazardous waste, that differs per country, and that makes it very challenging also for criminal investigations, but also for supervision and just enforcement. Because one country can say, let's say, first go through the 3 options. Non-OECD countries can inform the EU to say, okay, I don't want to have your non-hazardous waste. So let's take, for example, plastic, non-hazardous plastic waste, the foils, etc. Some countries can say, no, EU, we don't want to have your plastic waste imported in our country. So then it's prohibited. Another country is saying, a non-OECD country is saying, oh, you can send it, but just with a prior informed consent procedure. So then there is a permit. So at least all the competent authorities involved, they are aware about certain shipments. Many other countries, non-OECD countries, say, well, we want to receive them. We don't find it necessary that there is a prior informed consent procedure followed. We have our own national control procedures in place, so we are controlling. Sorry. Okay. So they are saying you can send us the waste. We have national control procedures in place. So that means you have a difference. One country, country A, can say, okay, it's prohibited to import the waste, or they say only with prior informed consent. But the neighboring country is saying, no, you can send it. We have national control procedures in place. So you can understand what is going to happen then. It's unclear in documentations, etc. And waste will be shipped to the countries which have the less strict procedures in place, at least according to the documents. What are the main destinations for waste generated in the EU? And when it's related to transboundary shipments of waste, most of the shipments are taking place between EU member states. And that can be all kinds of waste, including hazardous waste. That can be sent for disposal. And when it's then a prior informed consent need to be followed, also when it's a shipment between member states. And when it's waste, hazardous waste sent for recycling, also this prior informed consent procedure need to be followed. Non-hazardous waste shipments, so plastics, papers, and most of the metal scrap, it can be dealt almost freely with this simplified procedure. That's just a document which is being filled in by the exporter and sent accompanying the shipment and going to the importer. In only a few EU member states, these hazardous waste shipments need to be notified to the competent authorities as well. That can be on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, and in some countries before the shipment, and in many countries when the shipment already has taken place. So this is not really a good source to focus on, and it's only, I believe, in 1 or 2 EU member states, and I believe in some parts of the UK, this is also implemented. In all the other countries and all the other EU member states, to be honest, the authorities have no clue, no idea about these shipments of non-hazardous waste going from one EU member state to another, but also when they are exported as non-hazardous waste for recycling to non-OECD. When the country says you can send it without any procedure, we have our national control procedures in place. Authorities are simply not aware. And we have to say, if I speak only for the Netherlands, we have 1.5 million waste shipments per year, and 80% of those shipments are declared as non-hazardous waste sent for recycling. So if nobody is informing us, we actually have no idea what is being shipped, to be very frankly and honest. Between the next to the shipments of between the EU member states, we also have export to OECD countries. So let's say to the more developed countries. I gave you some examples. We have a lot of export to Turkey, and that are mainly metals, metal scrap. They have a huge metal recycling industry in Turkey. So vessels full with metals scrap are going to Turkey. Also plastics, but when we look to weight, it's mainly metals. And on top of that, we have the export to non-OECD countries, and we can divide it a little bit. If and just very rough, I'm going to divide it. We can say we have export to the African continent and then you need to define if it's waste or not. So I come back to that a little bit later. To the African continent, we mainly see used equipment going. That can be used electric and electronical equipment. A discussion if that's waste or not. End-of-life vehicles, and spare parts. Waste or not is the question. What is in the news and in the media at the moment? A lot of export of textiles. Is it being used? Can it be considered as waste at the moment of export, or becomes it waste at the moment it arrives in the African continent or in certain countries? All those kind of issues we are aware, but and there is good legislation, but it's very hard to define what is actually at the moment of export, what is being done with the materials. Next to the export to Africa, we have a lot of trade for recyclable materials, mainly, and that's going to the Asia region. And very roughly, we can say that the volume is mostly waste paper, metal scrap, and waste plastics. All non-hazardous waste, most of them declared at least as non-hazardous waste. And of course, we are detecting several shipments which are hazardous or which didn't follow the right procedures. What are the main modus operandi used for illegal shipments of waste? Based on the experiences we have for certain decades, focusing on the exports and on the transboundary shipments in general, we can see, concealment is a method which is often used. That is sending contaminated waste hidden behind non-contaminated waste, or hazardous waste hidden behind non-hazardous waste, or hidden behind products. And then misdeclaration. I think you can call it forgery or misdeclaration, whatever you want to use, but most of the time it's that waste is being declared as a product. That can be in customs declarations, that can be in invoices and other commercial contracts, for example. They don't say it is waste, but they say it's a product. So, or they say it's non-hazardous waste instead of that it is hazardous waste. And it's often misdeclared that in one country is a stricter control than in the neighboring country. That's mainly related to what I explained before. That's the additional legislation we have for the export of non-hazardous waste from the EU to non-OECD countries. You often see that shipments of waste will be declared to countries which have less strict legislation in place than the neighboring countries. An example, if you are going to export plastic waste, for example, from the Netherlands to Thailand, then you need to follow a prior informed consent procedure. So then Thailand can say, okay, they allow it or not, but at least there is a permit, there is a control mechanism in place. But if we are going to send this to Laos, which is the neighboring country of Thailand, which is a landlocked country, so the shipment first should enter or via Vietnam, but most of the time through Lam Shabang port in Thailand. And in Thailand, they say, okay, it's transit, so it's going to Laos, and Laos is that we have national control procedures in place. So when in the documentation is mentioned, the shipment is destined for Laos, we have no clue if it's really ending up in Laos or when it's going to change the direction from Lam Chabang port, because no prior informed consent is needed, because the destination countries say we don't require a strict procedure. So that gives a lot of opportunities for doing illegal business and committing fraud and exporting illegally waste to other destinations as what is actually in documents. Some examples of concealment, hidden hazardous waste. This is a X-ray photo from a scanner from customs. And you can see at the right-hand side of the screen, you see bales. That's the doors of the container are there. And you can see in the rest of the container, there is other material. So inspections are awfully when they don't have scanners. So at borders mainly, inspectors are opening the doors. They see the bales and they say, okay, non-hazardous waste, and most of the time simplified procedures are followed. So, but if you look behind those bales, you can see what you see on the next slide. IBCs containing hazardous waste, and in this case it was a detection from in the port of Rotterdam on its way from Germany, the waste on its way from Germany to Vietnam and stopped over here. Declared waste paper, I think you have seen many of those photos before. Declared as non-hazardous waste, I think in this case to Indonesia. And if you look what is actually being shipped, then it's more municipal and medical waste than it's non-hazardous waste paper. Plastic waste, Monsieur Yibing is here. So this was a shipment detected on its way to Malaysia in the port of Antwerp and coming from a Dutch exporter. Municipal waste, electronic waste, as you see, and declared as a clean plastic waste. This is being stopped. So most of the time, the destination countries are even not aware that it was on its way to their country. And I will say something later about that as well as one of the challenges. The legislation is clear when it's regarding waste, but in daily practice, it's not often that clear if certain materials should be declared as second-hand goods or as waste. I'll just give you a few examples. When you look at the photos, TVs sent to the African continent may be working. Luckily, these days we have more strict and helpful legislation, which gives minimum requirements for shipments of electric and electronical equipment to make the distinguishment if we need to consider it as a waste or as a second-hand product. It should be properly packed. It should be tested. There should be statements and invoices that it is working. Well, in this case, we can see, and I'm talking about the photo in the left top side of the screen. You can see those TVs are not properly packed for being shipped over the oceans, and definitely not in winter time or stormy seasons. The chance that there is damage is very huge. So in this case, since there's new regulations, we can stop such shipments and say, well, this is not properly packed. Even they are working or not, we don't care. We consider this as a waste transport, and you may restart your shipment again if they are properly packed, tested, and etc. Then another issue, tires, end-of-life tires, or maybe used tires. Are they waste or not? Are they being used again? Depending on the use in the countries. Also, we see a lot of tires being shredded and selling for energy recovery to Asia mainly, and also within the European Union, but many are going to enter Turkey as well. At the right-hand side, you see the roofs of cars. Well, the climate in my country is that you cannot use a cabriolet every day per year, but well, you see these roofs are sometimes sent to as a spare part, and we have to decide, is this a waste or not? Well, it's not that easy. I don't want to bother you too much, but these are the challenges we are facing during controls of export of materials, and then say, is it waste or not? Another type of misdeclaration is that it's not, well, it's sent to non-licensed facilities. We see a lot, and we have a very good cooperation at the moment with the Malaysian authorities, which have a clear system of if a facility is licensed or not for plastic waste imports. So many EU countries are using the lists which are being shared with by the Malaysian authorities with the authorities in the European Union. So we can simply check if a plastic waste shipment is going to a licensed facility or not. And that really helps us in supervision and enforcement, because if it's destined for a non-licensed facility, we are stopping simply the export and we say it's an illegal shipment, and they need to come up with evidence that that it's a legal shipment, for example. And another thing is that it's being sent for a recycling for a treatment operation, and these treatment operations, they are defined with R&D codes. I don't want to bother you too much, but often when they say it's for R3, it means that the waste is really being recycled, and so they make from waste and new raw material again, or it's being used for energy. So that means that after this operation, the recycling method is fulfilled. So you cannot speak about waste anymore. But often waste is being shipped for R12 or R13 operations. That just means storage and rebaling and repacking, and that's all. And you cannot say the treatment facility is actually doing a real treatment. It's just temporary storage. And this is mainly related to plastic waste. Very important to understand that if the company is, which is mentioned in the documentation as the final destination, that it is really the final destination where the waste is being recycled and not simply being stored and packed. What are the remaining challenges? Because I don't want to speak about problems of issues, but there are some challenges we have to face. Everybody heard about the circular economy principle, and as we are fully agree with this policy on circular economy, it also has some threats in itself. And one of them is, or a few of them are, we will have upcoming stricter EU legislation for export of recyclable waste to non-OECD countries. And we are expecting new amendments to the Basel Convention. One will enter into force at the 1st of January 2025, when it's about electronic waste. That means that, you know, there will be more stricter regulations. And does it mean we have less export, or the materials will still be exported, but we don't call them waste anymore? And this is a trend we are seeing at the moment. Materials are more and more being exported as end of waste or even as byproducts to avoid restrictions and controls. For example, since the new amendments to the Basel Convention on plastics, it's according to the implementation and the European legislation of that amendment, it's not longer allowed to ship, to export PVC waste, so polyvinyl chloride, so plastics, certain type of plastics. That's prohibited to export from the EU to non-OECD countries. So what are we seeing now? What are we facing? That many exporters, they want to have an end of waste status, as they call, for this PVC material. So that means they are shredding it. They are doing some of the recycling operation already in the EU, and then send the same material as a kind of a flake to the destination countries. So that means the destination countries still will receive PVC waste, but they are trying to avoid the stricter regulations. And this is a trend we are seeing, and we only have a few formal end of waste regulations in the EU. That's mainly on metals, copper scrap, iron and steel and aluminium. And those are the ones where when there is EU regulation in place. So that's very strict. Exporters need to follow several procedures, and we are testing also on what kind of hazardous substances are still in the materials itself. So this is really a trend. We think this causes a lot of issues the upcoming years. Further, in general, we can say the improvement of risk management and profiling in as well exporting and importing countries are needed. We cannot simply, if we want to do controls on export of on trade of plastic waste, just to cooperate with customs and say, okay, if you control a 100% control on HS code 3915, well, that's simply not enough, because the criminals or the ones who are want to do illegal business, illegal trade, well, and let's be honest, they don't declare these materials as 3915 under this custom code. So you need to do much more on risk management and risk profiling and share much more information than is being done at the moment. In destination countries, mainly, there is a position of free trade zones. For us, a free trade zone is still part of a certain country, to the territorium of that country. So we understand that free trade zones, from a customs perspective, has some exemptions, not paying taxes, etc., that you can bring your material there. But be aware that your free trade zones are not becoming a dumping ground, because if you bring the material there, nobody will have a look at it. Well, in many countries, nobody will have a look at it. And then you will see abandoned containers with waste. And those trade zones are becoming more a dumping place of waste than actually what the main thought was about is free trade zones. For us, in exporting countries, it's very difficult to stop those, as when we have communication with authorities in destination countries, they say, oh, it's going to a free trade zone, we cannot stop it. We have a different opinion on it because it's still in your territory of the country, even it is a free trade zone, not according to tax, but according to other laws. Yeah, we have a different opinion. Improvement of information.
Yes. Please ask you to wrap up, because we want to leave enough time for the other speakers as well. Can I please ask you to come to the conclusion of your presentation?
I have 2 sentences, so that's very good. Improvement of information exchange between exporting and importing countries is really needed, and this is an issue which is there for decades. But this is still not happening. If we stop a shipment in the exporting country, we are not informing the importing countries. So we are not aware if this is just one single shipment, or if they do it monthly, or via other countries, etc. And last but not least, and hopefully our colleague from Malaysia, Yibin, will present or will say a few words on this. For the importing countries, it's really important to make use of the take-back procedures which are in place in the Basel Convention. And that's all. Thank you very much. I apologize for running out of time.
No, thank you very much. That was extremely helpful, and it gave us a good sense of the different types of illicit activities that are happening in relation to waste, and also the different types of waste products, and also all the challenges. It's very good way to move the conversation forward. So we've spoken about the country, the perspective from a country that exports waste. I would now like to turn to one of the countries that receives some of these waste, and in order to do that, I'm very pleased to welcome our next panelist, Yobi Yin, who is a member of parliament in Malaysia, and she has also served as Minister of Energy, Science, Technology, Environment and Climate Change between 2018 and 2020. And during her tenure as a minister, she made international headlines fighting foreign plastic waste coming to Malaysia and sending it back to their country of origin, among other actions that she took. So we're very happy to have her here today. Yin, the floor is yours.
Hello, thanks, Virginia. Hi, everyone. My name is Yobi Yin. You can call me Bien. So today I just want to share with you some of our Malaysian experience on the illegal dumping of plastic waste in our country when I was a minister from 2018 to 2020. Maybe can I see the slide? I am not very sure if there is. Today I just want to share a little bit of my experience as a minister. During that time, I remember when I just first sworn in, one of the first complaints was about there is an illegal recycling factory in a small village nearby Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital of the country. And that we just thought that, yeah, it is probably just another illegal factory. So I told the Department of Environment, let's take action, do an enforcement, shut it down. After we shut that one down, and then another one come out, and then another one come out. Maybe you show the next slide. My slides are all just pictures to show you. So this is one of the things we do. We go to the illegal recycling factories, we seal the equipment, do everything. I think from 2018, from August onwards until the end of 2018, we have been doing it. And I was wondering, why after we shut down one, another one open, after we shut down one, another open. So by the time I thought something is not right, and then I went to the operation, the enforcement operation together with the officers. Then we realized that I was very shocked in some of the plastic waste pile that I saw, maybe a Sainsbury plastic shopping bags. And then I saw Linda shopping bag. And then I saw, different types of, from really very far, half the globe away, and now end up in the illegal recycling factory in Malaysia, emitting very, very foul smell and releasing a lot of water that's very polluted to our river. So then we realized that it is maybe if we shut down, but then the source, because what happened then is that if you have a free raw materials that comes from developed country, free raw material, but they are contaminated, that means they are not readily recyclable. They are contaminated plastic waste. The only way for you to make money in Malaysia, because Malaysia has quite a strict environmental law, the only way for you to make money is to be an illegal factory. And therefore, you don't need to comply to clean air regulation. You don't need to comply to any of the discharge environmental law. Then you can make quick profit out of it. So because the raw materials are free, so we are told, then it give them a lot of incentives to do it. The other observation we saw was that some of these illegal factories are operated by people from China. So they came here and do it, and that we were told, and that when I checked and then realized that what happened was that end of 2017, China announced that they are no longer going to accept plastic waste to their country. So some of the plastic recycling factories in China, then will have to find somewhere else to process their plastic waste. And then they moved to Southeast Asia because of our vicinity to China. And that is why Southeast Asia, not only Malaysia, were flooded with waste that was supposed to be in China, but then relocated and reshipped to some of the Southeast Asia country. So there is a study that says that, if there's nothing done, more than 111 million tons of plastic waste is going to end up in other countries' shore and not China. So then we realized it's a huge problem. I did not, when I first was told the problem, I thought it was just an illegal factory problem. And then what we found is actually a big international crime. To my in my interpretation, I think this is a international crime and it's a scam. Why I say so? Because most of these illegal waste, most of this waste comes from the developed countries. So what we do was that. So then I realized that in order for me to solve my problem, I need to be able to stop at the source. I need to be able to say, no plastic waste can come in. If there is cheap plastic waste, even though they are polluted, there will be people who have enough incentive to do an illegal factory in Malaysia. In order for me to stop the illegal factory, recycling factory in Malaysia, plastic recycling factory in Malaysia, I need to go to the port and stop at the source. So that is what we did. We went to the port. We faced a lot of problems because there is a lot, like Hoop say just now on the actually what they it's a misdeclaration, so a false declaration. So they will say they are not plastic waste. They will be 3920. It's not 3915 under a control item, right? So we went there and we looked. There are a lot of containers that are full of rubbish. It's really full of rubbish. I remember one of the day when I was in the port and we opened up the container. It's really disgusting. What we found was a milk bottle from Australia, and inside the milk bottle, it's not only with stickers. It's not only that it's dirty. Inside the milk bottle, there's maggots, and still alive, and that was so disgusting. And that show you how different rubbish come from different part of the world to Malaysia, and I'm sure to other parts of the world as well. So as we were considering of what do we want to do, what do we want to do to solve this problem, and that some people just told me that, hey, why not you just auction off some of your, anyway, they reach your shore already, and we are not allowing them to come out from the port, so they are congesting the ports. 100 over containers are congesting the ports. People are forcing me, we need to decongest a port. You cannot stop them from coming into Malaysia. Why not you just auction them off to the legal recycling? But if we do that, then there will be a moral hazard that people will know, let me dump in the Malaysia port, and that they will auction it off and to solve my problem. So what we did was that we then look to Basel Convention and see whether or not we can use Basel Convention to return the waste. Unfortunately, there was no such a direct clause to it. So we needed to work around, this was before the 2021 amendment, whereby you will have an annex, which I will tell a little bit later on why after Basel Amendment change, this will become easier. But that time, there's no such thing. So we started very, very slowly because no country has done that. Why I decided to return back the containers simply because it is not that it is an effective thing to do. I am not only an environment minister, I'm a climate change minister. It is a very carbon intensive thing to do. But why do we want to do this? It's because we want to send a big message. And so I told my team that, we do not only want to do it, we are going to invite international media to come and then to be able to say, to really look at what happened in developing country. Why I decided, one of the trigger point or to make me the tipping point moment was I was in Singapore for an Asia Pacific Environment Ministers United Nations do some forum, or I cannot remember, but there's a meeting there. One of the environment minister from third world country actually told me whole of his country's islands are full of foreign garbage. But he told me with a very disappointed or a very dejected face, he said, but our country has no mechanism to fight it. So that is when I told myself, Malaysia is not a developed country, but we have enough people, enough machinery, enough knowledge to fight this and to be their voice in this matter. So that is when I decided that no matter how difficult, we want to be able to send back this waste. And so that's when we start. And some of the things you saw on the slides are the whole of 2019, we start with 0 container. And we started with nobody believed that we can return it back. Everyone said that there is no such international convention. Everyone told us that it's impossible. But we are very, very thankful that we have very dedicated officers where we really look into Basel Convention and look at other clauses that we can use indirectly to send back the containers and send a very good message. So it is covered in most of the international headlines, as you see everywhere, every part in the world. It's covered, and we have met our objective to send a very strong message. By the end of 2019, more than 100 containers were sent back. And then I decided to say, okay, it is not enough. Let's put a standard operating procedures. That means if I'm not a minister anymore, I want my successor to, all government agencies, they change people, they do everything. They will have certain things to follow. I want our officers to document it. So by I think 2019, end of 2019 and 2020, then we came up with standard operating procedures. And that after our government fall, so I was no longer a minister. But I was very, very pleased that the procedures were continued, and that by so far, more than 250 containers were sent back. So I think if we really need to fight this, and that we really need to voice out for the developing countries. But on another note, I also know that many of the people in the developed world that really diligently sort out their waste, thinking that it is good for the environment. But what is like here is this. Let me just tell you why international recycling, I think, is the biggest scam of plastic dumping. Why? For the matter, let me just say, let's say, for example, a person in the UK, you sort out your rubbish, and then because it is very, very expensive to recycle your plastic in UK, so you decided that you will the rubbish collector or the waste manager, the waste management company will decided that it's too expensive. Let me just export the waste in the name of recycling. And the worst is that because there is no way to track whether this waste is recycled or not in the destination country, this particular waste management company or these companies get to enjoy the subsidies by the local government that, hey, you have recycled. But as the matter of fact is, they have not recycled. They have exported the waste for recycling without tracking. So this happened in many, many developed countries. At least to my knowledge, during our time, when we were faced with this problem, I have asked many of our sending countries whether they can track where did the rubbish go, and most of them say they could not. So what happened is that we actually don't have a way to track. If you are from developed country, we don't have a way to track. Eventually, this plastic waste that's supposed to export out for recycling is actually recycled or being dumped, or being illegally recycled in another part of the world, which is half the globe away. So we really need to do the soul searching, whereby is it really environmental friendly to first do it that you send your waste half of the globe away, for even with proper recycling? Second thing we need to ask is this, is that the Basel Convention spirit is that one, you must first try your best to not export out the waste. So I think the developed country has taken it very complacent. They have not tried their best to not to send out the export out the waste. I think it's an easy way out for them. And then they can give this plastic waste for free to our recyclers here, is because what is their source of income? Their source of income is actually the subsidies from the government. So the government are subsidizing something of a very that actually is not good for the environment. But so I intended to actually do some investigation and see what are the companies that are involved and all that. But my time in office was too short that I did not get involved in it. But the idea is that if we don't solve the tracking problem, this thing is going to continue. So since then, there is an amendment to Basel Convention. Maybe you show the table. There's an amendment to Basel Convention. We used to have plastic that is all in Annex okay, Annex 9. That means plastics are always, you do not need prior informed consent. But in 2019, after the incident and that Norwegian government actually proposed to separate them out to different category of the Basel Convention. So then it will be Annex 2 and Annex Annex 8. So these two that you actually need prior informed consent. So with this, it is better now because then we can say there is no prior informed consent, we send it back. Last time, during our time, there is none. Plastic waste it is not a control item in the Basel Convention. So it's a little bit better. But I think I share my book. There is a chapter in my book that I write about my experience in trying to fight this illegal dumping problem. One of the things that I wrote about was during that time I did not know UN actually have this initiative to start to negotiate of a plastic treaty, and I think this is something we need because it is very, very important for us to try. Even at this moment, even with Basel Convention, it is still very much depends on enforcement and depends on intelligence. That means, for example, how do we know that it is they do not send it now? Even with Basel Convention, what they can do is to do false declaration. Oh, this is not 3915. Oh, this is not Annex 2. This is not what. So they send it back. They send it to the different ports. And just think about developing country. Developing countries, the ports are not like, I don't know about developed country, but at least the ports don't scan or you cannot really have the intelligence to be able to open up every container to check. And that it is just impossible, especially for plastic, whether it's contaminated or not. How are you going to do it? There's no technology to do it. What you can do is really manually open up every single container, and that's impossible. So even with Basel Convention, I still feel that there is still a lot of there may still be a lot of problem with tracking. That is why I'm looking forward to the United Nations Plastic Treaty and see how this will actually help in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the world is going to, by 2050, the world is going to have about 10 billion people. And the world is going to get richer. One of the things that we see is that every time people get richer, the GDP, the plastic consumption is correlates with your GDP. Because once you're richer, you get to buy a lot of things. And now with how we consume things, how we produce things, these things are bound to happen. Therefore, it is very important for our generation to be able to say that we have an international framework and enforcement and a proper system in place that they will not be dumping, because otherwise we will by 2050, when we have 10 billion people, when the world get richer, we will have even more problems with the plastic waste that we have. And eventually, we all share the same ocean. And eventually, if all of these plastics end up in the ocean, end up in different parts, it will still affect our world. So I think this is one. There are two messages I want to bring back. One is that we must have a real framework to track. If first of all, try to recycle yourself at home. If you really cannot, because the country is too small, there's no economy of scale. If you really cannot have a proper tracking system to track, to make sure that the plastic is recycled before subsidies is given. This is the first thing I want to say. And this is very important for our future, because the future is just going to be more plastics. And of course, I hope there will be a replacement or substitute to plastic. If everything in technology stays and status quo, then that is something that we have to do. Second thing, I think I want to leave it to say that it is not only plastic waste that I'm seeing today. Actually, recently, I see a lot of e-waste that are coming in already, because look, the world is more and more digitalized, and so many of us have mobile phones, and we have servers, we have data centers, and now even with solar panels. In 20 years' time, we are going to face with a lot of decommissioning of solar panels, maybe in 10 years, because some of the solar panels has 20 years of age. So some of them already 10 years. So we have, in 10 years' time, we are going to see another round of dumping. That round of dumping will be about panels, batteries, e-waste. So is the world ready for it? And I think there is still a lot of room for improvement for that. So that's my sharing with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Begin. That was fascinating to hear about your experience and also you dispelling this myth of recycling and also looking ahead at the challenges that we'll be facing, for instance, with regards to solar panels. And now I'd like to turn to the final panelist, Ms. Joanna Katutu from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. She's based in Bangkok in the Southeast Asia and Pacific office, where she's responsible for the Unwaste project, which is a project that we'll hear about shortly from her. So Joanna, the floor is yours, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Virginia, and thanks a lot to Global Initiative for inviting me to speak on behalf of UNODC. So I will start maybe before going specifically into Unwaste. I'm going to talk a little bit what UNODC is doing at the global level in order to tackle waste trafficking, and we can go to the next slide. You cannot see the next slide. So there we can go to slide number 3. So there are a couple of initiatives, and this list is not comprehensive. First is the project I'm going to focus more on today, Unwaste, tackling waste trafficking to support the circular economy. The other work that is done by my colleague in the container control program, where they're working directly with port control units in order to tackle waste trafficking in container supply chains. Colleagues, my colleagues from the headquarters office, they also who are responsible for implementation of UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. They also put together a legislative guide on combating waste trafficking that I think goes back to the legislative provisions that I think that we heard talking a little bit earlier during this webinar, and there are also a different policy awareness raising activities. And UNODC is present in the Basel Conference of Parties with different statements and activities. Also, some colleagues from UNODC are presented in side events at the UNFCCC COPs, and also some of my colleagues are present in the INC proceedings and events. And right now, a little bit more about the project Unwaste. We can go to the next slide and play the video if it's possible.
Our current practices around production, consumption, and discarding are not sustainable and create too much waste. Instead, we must adopt a circular system focused on circular design that reduces, reuses, and recycles. In such a system, waste as a commodity is either processed domestically or exported for recycling to make new products. But the export of illegal waste, particularly toxic, hazardous, contaminated, or unrecyclable waste, is often hidden with legal waste shipments using fraudulent documents. Despite existing regulations, waste traffickers are empowered by ineffective law enforcement, low penalties, and opportunities for easy profits. Illegal waste that is trafficked harms the environment, economy, and health of communities in recipient countries. But the tide is turning. Countries in Southeast Asia, unwilling to be burdened by illegal waste are refusing shipments and tightening controls and regulations. UNODC and its partners are taking steps to combat waste trafficking with UnWaste. This project will provide a better understanding of waste flows, both legal and illegal, from the European Union to Southeast Asia. UnWaste aims to help uncover waste trafficking networks and to disrupt illegal activities. UnWaste will help build a transparent partnership between Europe and Southeast Asia that will limit the ease and profitability of waste trafficking. It's time to get serious about addressing waste pollution and to unlock the circular economy with UnWaste.
Thank you very much. We can move to the next slide. Where we are going to have a little bit of text after the video. I think the video explained a little bit about the project. So the project UnWaste is implemented, as you saw, in cooperation with the United Nations Environmental Programme. We also benefit of the support of another agency called UNITAR, and the project is financed by European Union. The project focuses specifically on waste flow between European Union and Southeast Asia. And there are three main elements in the project. First of one is related to data and research. And I'm going to talk about the challenges related to data a little bit further in my presentation. Another element relates to national dialogues, where we're trying to facilitate cooperation between different agencies at national level. But in the same time, we are trying to facilitate the interregional partnership and cooperation within ASEAN countries, but also between countries in Southeast Asia and European Union. And we can go to the next slide. So UnWaste project started about 2 years ago, and while we did a lot of things, a lot of activities, I just want to highlight a couple of them because we have a limited amount of time. We can get to the next slide. One of the highlights of the project is this quarterly bulletin that we are publishing. That's done in cooperation with UNITAR, where we are trying to look at the movements. We are looking in open source data, looking at flows, legal flows of different types of waste, but also looking in the legislative development in different countries in Southeast Asia. Also developments related to Basel Convention, and the bulletin is published every 3 months. So far, we published a more general edition that you see now on the screen, but also editions dedicated to plastic, to e-waste, to metal, and to paper. And we are preparing an edition on hazardous waste presently. So in addition of that, we also have interviews with different key stakeholders who are sharing their experience, case studies shared by countries in Southeast Asia. And it's published every 3 months. You can scan the QR code if you want to subscribe, or you can be in touch if you want to add it to the distribution list. We can move to the next slide. Also, as part of the research element of the project, we are currently working along with UNAP, with the support of UNITAR, on a report that we are going to publish early next year, where we are going to look into different elements related to waste. We are going to look into the response, legislative response in Southeast Asia regarding waste trafficking. We are going to look into the legal flows of waste and what we can observe based on open source data, and then zoom into some illegal cases that are shared by 4 countries in Southeast Asia, by Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and also cases shared by some European ports, including I think Hype's colleagues from the Port of Rotterdam, but also cases shared by Port of Genoa and the Port of Antwerp. Additionally, there are sections dedicated into exploring the intersection between waste trafficking and corruption, potential involvement of transnational organized crime networks, how money is laundered through waste trafficking, etc. So we are just touching the surface actually with this report. And I think Charlene talked a little bit early in this presentation about some challenges related to the data. We're trying to collect the data, but the data is very scattered, it's inconsistent. It's really hard to have a comprehensive picture what actually happens in terms of illegal trafficking. However, due to data provided by, for example, World Customs organizations and by organizations like IMPAL, we can have a good idea of different trends that can be observed in terms of waste trafficking. So the report will be published in early next year, and I hope we can talk more about that, like in a maybe next webinar. We can move to the next slide. In order to bring together the different agencies responsible for different elements of waste management or waste trade in different countries, we are facilitating this working groups or consultation bodies in each of the 4 countries we are working closely with: Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam. And actually what is really notable that these 4 countries made tremendous efforts in order to combat waste trafficking following the China ban. I think, as my previous presenters presented, especially in Malaysia, was faced with a very very impressive amount of unwanted waste. These 4 countries actually set the bar quite high in terms of response that they put in place to combat waste trafficking. However, it is estimated that even more work is necessary in order for countries to coordinate domestically, but also within ASEAN region. Additionally, all the work that was done in these 4 countries can be used as benchmark for other countries in the world who are faced with the unwanted influx of waste and who want to put in place different types of response. We can move to the next slide. As part of the international cooperation here, I just put some images, not very much text. What we found out from different counterparts from the European Union, but also from the 4 countries we are working closely with in Southeast Asia, that there is sometimes not complete understanding about the different things that are put in place in the different regions. Last year in October, we had 16 delegates from the 4 countries in Southeast Asia that I mentioned, who traveled to Brussels and met the key counterparts from the European Union and presented their work, their response, but also talk about their expectations regarding the response of the European Union. And also there were some dialogues who started to put basis of some cooperation. Of course, some countries already have really tight cooperation with some European member states. Also in this image, we see we visited with the delegates from the 4 countries from customs offices, the port of Genoa in Italy, where very interesting exchanges took place regarding the different procedures, how the risk assessment is done, and how cooperation between the customs offices between different countries can be more efficient and more effective. We can move to the next slide. I don't want to go into many details about waste right now because the time we have is limited. We have a website that you can access. There is also a web platform that was put in place by a previous project that we inherited. It's called Waste Enforcement Asia Community. You're welcome to join if you want to be part of the exchanges and also have all the news and announcements from different stakeholders who are active on the site. And you can be in touch with the UNODC team working on this project in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, or with myself for any matters. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work that is done by my colleagues in other parts of UNODC. We can go to the next slide. The colleagues from the UNODC WCO Container Control Program, they have a project on plastic and hazardous waste, and the project focuses more on frontline officers from customs. And the project was kicked in June 2021 and focuses on Southeast Asia. There are in-depth technical assessment and national workshops that are conducted by all participant countries, especially customs level. There is a close cooperation between this project and World Customs Organization and Basel BRS Secretariat. And there are different trainings and mentorship programs that are happening between, a couple of targeted countries in Southeast Asia. And specifically, the project focused at one point on abandoned containers, identifying Southeast Asian countries who are holding thousands of tons of plastic waste. The project also provides technical assistance to customs officers. We can go to the next slide. I think we can skip to the next. And one last initiative that I wanted to mention, and I think one of my colleagues who work on this guide is also, I think it's among the audience during this webinar. There is a legislative guide that was developed to look into good legislative practices. You can access the guide. And the guide contains 29 model provisions and 21 legislative examples from across the world. If you go to the next slide, we can see the different sections of the guide. And this guide can be particularly interesting for legislators, but not only to look into different elements of the legislative frameworks that could be put in place in different countries. And I think this was my presentation for now. And I just wanted to give a little short overview of different the streams of work the university is doing on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciated your presentation, Ioana, and just hearing about all these different initiatives. I realize we don't have a huge amount of time left for Q&A, but I'm glad that the panelists have started answering some of those questions in writing in the chat. There are 3 outstanding questions, and I'll just pose them to everybody, and then I'll just give each panelist just 1 minute for any final reflections and the opportunity to answer those questions. So the first one is about money. So what is the most common way criminals use to pay individuals or companies for illicit transfer of waste? And then as an addition to that, is there a way anti-money laundering regulations and operators can help to fight those criminals? The second question is about shouldn't it be better to finalize the invoices after the government approved the recycling? And the final question is about the fact that it seems that most plastics that are exported actually don't have recyclability properties. So wouldn't it be better to look upstream to reduce illicit shipping of non-recyclables, and therefore also reduce the use of non-recyclable plastics at source? So things such as sachets, for instance. I know that Bijin is very pressed for time, so I'll ask her to go first with any final views.
Thank you. I would just answer the second one. Shouldn't it be better to finalize invoicing? I think this is a very good way to suggest in the next maybe in the United Nations negotiation of how the country, before you actually export, when you export, especially when subsidies is given, you must have then a proof that a legal recycling factory is receiving it and recycle, and then you get the subsidies. I think that will help a lot. It's a very, very good, actually it's a very good suggestion. The second one, the last one that Nina was talking about, this Indonesia importing PET. Actually, you're right. In Malaysia, when we stopped, when we had this plastic influx problem, we actually banned import for a month. The plastic recycling industry actually was really crying to us and say, hey, we don't have enough raw material because we don't collect enough here, and our factory is made for that kind of capacity. So I think for some of the things that we need to think about is whether one country wants to be a plastic recycling hub, if you want to, whether you have the ability to do that. So at that time, I told them, whatever the existing factories that are already have that capacity, they can continue to import, but no more new factories that will source from plastic import. So if you want to do a plastic recycling, the waste must come from local. But maybe there will be change in the future because we still need a more efficient way of recycling, and not every country has a scale. That means, let's say if we are 5 million population, it's just not economically sensible for you to recycle yourself. So there must be an aggregation point to recycle that. So which country is going to do that? What are the framework? So I shall leave now. I thank you so much for everyone, and we hope to see all of you sometimes in person. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for attending and for your input. Bye-bye. I'd like now to go like in the reverse order. So Joanna, would you have any final views in answer to those questions, or just any final words of wisdom from your side?
So I think that everything that was shared during this webinar, it's very relevant. It's something we heard a lot during the different consultations with countries, during the when we try to find data. I think it's very important for us to avoid wasting time to try different organizations to come together and find synergies and work together as much as possible, also along with the governments, government agencies, and the relevant enforcement bodies. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to take too much time again, but if I look to the questions which are being asked, the question from Boba, shouldn't it be better to finalize invoicing after government approves recycling? It just relates to what do you have in mind of what kind of waste are we talking about. If it's about municipal waste, there should be a government and packaging waste coming from municipal waste. Then you have this issue of the approved recycling, and we know about the packaging recovery export notes in the UK. But what is related to that, if it comes to crime, I think in several cases, this waste is exported, let's say, from the UK through other EU countries, but finally ending up somewhere in Asia. And one is the recovery note. It's sent for R3, which I tried to explain in my presentation. So for final treatment in another EU country. But that's not happening there. It's just rebaling, resorting, and sometimes not at all, just collecting and putting it in a container just from another country. And the documents are signed off in another EU member state and sent to the UK, and the waste is being recycled, and they can claim their subsidy, so to say. And this is I know that the Environment Agency and also with our own inspectorate is looking at those cases and have dealt with such cases in the past. But this is one which is related to a certain type of plastics, but most of the plastics are all foils. What we are seeing is a lot of foils. They are not under this government rules, so to say. That's packaging waste or waste coming from the industry. And that has nothing to do with approved recycling. That's just trade. So there are no subsidies involved. That is just trade between a waste generator he had to pay, or he is receiving a bit of money for his plastics, and and the economically best way he is trying to dispose or to send it somewhere. And so that's a different approach. So approved recycling mainly used for packaging waste, I think, coming from municipal waste, but it's not, you cannot say this in general for all types of waste. Very short on, upstream is always better, but there's a lot to be improved. I think I will leave it to here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Charlene, you have the final word. Perhaps you might want to say something about the money question as well.
Mm-hmm. So I actually want to finish up with definitely 3 points. And I mean, I'm no expert in the practical side of enforcing illegal waste trade. This is definitely, the purview, under the purview of HELP, and also what Joanna is doing with the Unwaste project. I really think, I commend them for the work that they do. I don't know per se how criminals are using, what ways criminals are using to pay individuals or companies, but one can imagine everything, stemming from cash to Bitcoins. So these are some of the ways that they can, evade tracking, for instance. If it comes out on the register as something to be watched out for, they want to be able to, hide in between the system and not get caught. So that's my short answer to the question. But back to my 3 points to finalize. I think the first one is there is an irony in how, waste ends up in the countries, the recipient countries. There's an irony there. The receiving country is getting waste from another country when they don't even have enough capacity to deal with their own waste. So that's really the irony. But because there's money to be had, there is a rush and maybe even monopoly to a certain extent to deal with this waste. Or like YB said, there are also illegal recycling facilities to deal with this. Now, secondly, we've heard from our experts here today how YB, Joanna, and I really think that to tackle the illegal waste problem, it all comes down also to leadership from ministers, leaderships from political persons, leadership from UN or DC. I really think that if they were to lead the way on these things, awareness would be raised. Right now with the plastics treaty, people have been talking about plastics for a very long time. Negotiations is already underway. It will come up with something hopefully in the next 2 years. But this is part and parcel of dealing with the problem. I correct myself, of course, by saying that I'm not saying that regulation is not the answer, but stringent regulation is not the answer. Tightening is not the answer. You have to be one step ahead of these criminal actors. I think that all my colleagues in this panel already emphasized that data could also be the problem here. We need precise data. If we don't have precise data, we don't know what we're dealing with, right? So crime, we're talking about law enforcement, but courts also have a role to play. But do judges, do prosecutors know enough about this problem in order to prosecute? So they also need to be trained one way or another in order to, come up with a seminal case on something. So one case that was finally educated upon came to Africa. So in 2006, big bunch of toxic waste ended up on the Ivory Coast. 100,000 people got sick immediately the day after. The company was sued. They paid up, but reparations for the victims was peanuts. But it was only about last month that the African court found that the Ivory nation, the government itself, failed to protect their citizens, failed to protect their human rights. So they are very slow. Courts are very slow to pick up. Laws are very slow to pick up. So what do we do in the meantime? We look at the people on the ground who are doing the thing. How do we equip them better? That's it from me. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Alan.
No, thank you very very much. And clearly there is plenty of interest in this topic, because I can see that most participants have stayed with us until now, and we are well over time, and I'm sure we could have continued for more. Well, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the participants. As I said at the beginning, the recording of this webinar will be available shortly on our website, the GI-TOC website, and also our YouTube channel. Please get in touch, and we hope to continue this conversation at a future webinar or in a similar setting. Thank you again, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.